And this evening, I would like to welcome folks in our audience to the City Council meeting and let you know that comments from the community are entertained during the time designated under citizens' comments on the agenda. If you wish to speak to council, please complete a comment card and turn that into Phyllis Bowman, our city recorder. Speakers' comments in this forum are limited to 3 minutes, but the council welcomes additional information in writing. Typically, a speaker's comment is taken under advisement to allow time for the council to review an issue. However, the mayor or councilors may ask the speaker for additional information or may convey to the speaker some information that addresses their comment. Please note on the card if you would like to receive follow-up communication. If so, what avenue is preferred so we can get back to you. And I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance at this meeting of the Monmouth City Council. And to let you know tonight, we do have one sort of routine issue in our agenda for our urban renewal agency. And so we'll probably do that up here so that we can just convene as the urban renewal agency, take care of that business before we retire to the back to handle the council work session, if that's all right with everyone. And we move to the consent calendar. I will entertain a motion to approve that. It consists of the minutes of the council meeting of October 1st and the regular work session of October 1st, unless there are any changes noted.
I move approval of both.
And a second?
I'll second it.
So moved by Councillor Silvernagel, seconded by Councillor Sharma to approve the consent calendar as presented. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And starting off with my report, and I have been spending a lot of time preparing for the meeting's agenda this evening, so I haven't been out and about a lot, but I will keep you updated as to my other activities going on. As we do our council reports. So speaking of that, I'll start with arts and culture. Had a meeting last night and almost a quorum after the new member we appointed last time was not able to be there, but the commission is looking at moving its meetings to the third Monday rather than the second Monday. That seems to work better for some of our folks, and hopefully we'd get a group there, but had a lot of great discussions about not only maybe an activity that we would start, but how to support all of the other great arts and cultural activities in the community, and had a lot of great discussion about that. So looking for more things from the Arts and Culture Commission. And Councillor Belts, the library board.
First, I have to say, I apologize if I have to run off for a moment. It's because I am coughing. So, and unfortunately, I was sick last week, and so I was unable to attend the library board, and I did not ask Chris for a report, which I should have done. I apologize for that. Would you like me to move on to the Historic Commission report? So we did have a very successful first inaugural History and Mystery event on Main Street on October 4th. Jessica Todd made a haunting appearance, and definitely we want to thank Zach Moss for recording the event, making it available on WMPEG for folks to watch, and to everybody that participated in the event. Thank you, Mayor Kuntz, Councillor Lopez, and the other folks that were there, and the 50 or so people that showed up, which was just wonderful. We had a great time, and I hope to do it again. Secondly, the railroad interpretive sign that will be placed in Main Street has been printed. The Commission's working with Western Oregon University Facilities Department to construct a sign, a frame for that display. Also, the Historic Commission has been discussing upcoming project ideas and including how to join the state and national efforts in celebrating the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Kids at home, look that up. It gave women the right to vote in the United States. Thank you.
Yes, that would be great. We have a group of students at Western who've done actually a website with regard to the 19th Amendment, and did a lot of statewide interviews and connected with the national efforts to recognize that. So
Oh,
it's
fantastic.
been they would have some great information about that.
Good.
And Councillor Schinkel will be in a little bit later. I don't have anything on our friends from Wimpeg at this point. So looking at community announcements. What's going on for the next couple of weeks? Homecoming at Western this weekend would be the homecoming game. I'll say that since Councillor Carey's not here to inform us of that activity. And
It's not necessarily an announcement, but I was very delighted on my drive down here tonight to see that there are stripes on the highway now.
There
and I
are.
can find Clay Street. I was so happy about that.
yeah, been hearing a lot of great things. People, I think, can really see finally getting that road work done. It was well worth the wait to have really that improved, widened roads and better marked areas and the bike lanes, and it's going to be awesome as we start getting ready for all these football games that going up and down 99. So. Thank you. And I will introduce to everyone officially our interim city manager, Chad Olson, retired from the city of Carlton, as well as formerly working for the city of St. Helens and the city of Rainier in Oregon, plus some other places around the state. Chad's had a whole 6 days on the job, 7, I guess, by the end of today. So I'm sure you have lots of great things to share with us.
Well, the one thing is, you can call me interim city manager. You can call me city manager pro tem. You could call me interim executive director. But so far, everyone has spelled my name right. So that's really the most important thing.
That is important.
And thank you. I'm glad to be here. Staff has been fantastic over the past week. Coming in last Monday, right out the gates, trying to get a council packet together, and Phyllis was fantastic with that. But it was a mad dash, right away. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you. And the only things that I had, since really the important stuff that I'm prepared to talk to are on the agenda tonight. But tomorrow at the senior center, there will be flu shots between 10 and 2. Bring your insurance card. Soup and pie is Thursday, 11 to 1:30, and I've heard that's very important to go do that.
You will not regret it.
Phyllis told me that I had to be there for that. It was not an option. Same with handing out candy on Halloween, apparently. And on November 9th, there's a tree planting party with the Tree Advisory Committee. We'll be doing that.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pretty exciting stuff, huh?
You know.
Just tell me all about it. Okay. So we are to the point for citizen comments. I have one speaker card here, and so Marilee Westfall, if you want to come up and introduce yourself. I think I got your name right.
I'm Marilee Westfall.
If you wanna,
I live
yeah.
on Madrona Street.
Okay.
Thank you.
And several of my neighbors and myself are very concerned about the traffic, not necessarily the amount of
If,
traffic,
I'll have you sit at the microphone so that it can be picked up for the audio. Thank you.
not necessarily the amount of traffic, which is substantial, but the speed of the traffic that they go down Madrona Street. They do not stop at the stoplight between Park Place and Talmadge Road. If they do stop, they have to make up the time for stopping and gunning it so they can get down to Talmadge as fast as they can. I have a neighbor that now is going out and yelling at people to slow down. So it's gotten to the part where we need to really have it addressed in some way. And I know that the police cannot be there 24/7. And just like anything else, it comes in spurts. Sometimes there's nobody there, and other times between 4 and 7:30, they're pss, 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 just one after another and going. And I prepared a few remarks here, and it starts that I live on Madrona Street for over a year now. I'm concerned about the amount and speed of traffic on a neighborhood street. With the proposed annexation of a new subdivision on 70-plus acres, on the east of us, my concern is really heightened. I am not the only resident on this street that is upset about the amount of traffic and the speed in our neighborhood. I had neighbors across the street that had 2 boys that were never outside. Their parents were afraid to let them play out front because of the traffic. That should be unacceptable. They eventually moved to a safer area. I would hope that this city council would be interested in keeping neighborhood streets livable and desirable in the city of Monmouth. I have contacted the Monmouth police about the traffic on Madrona and have only received lip service so far. Drivers do not respect the stop sign at Park Place. They either do a California stop or no stop at all. If they do stop, then they have to make up their time and gun it to Talmadge as quickly as possible. If the police are unable or unwilling to take measures to curb the speed in our neighborhood, maybe it's time to think about other options. Our street was not designed as a collector. It is not wide enough and will not allow for orderly and efficient circulation of traffic in this area. We also have children that walk and bike to and from the high school and the middle school on a busy and overused street. If the resources are not available to control the speed and volume of traffic, we need to look for other options. Speed bumps are an option. Once installed, they tend to slow the traffic and are not hard to maintain. This would not be my first option, but something needs to be done. I hope you are not looking at Madrona as an effective secondary to Monmouth Avenue. Hoffman would be a better choice. First and foremost, I hope you respect and consider the livability of neighborhoods. Very few people choose to have their neighborhood turn into a freeway.
Okay.
So those are my comments
All right,
to the
thank
city
you.
council.
Great, and we will get a response to you, kind of some of the points that you made about what we call our transportation master plan, which streets are considered major streets, collector streets, as you mentioned, and things like that. If there are any information that would help with that, we'll have our community development director respond to that, and certainly the police chief will let us know about the efforts that have been made to either put out the speed wagon and anything else that they've done. And if
Well, I've
there's-
talked to a policeman that was on our street one day. He had pulled over somebody that had gone through the stop sign, and when he was done, I went over and talked to him and asked him, and he said he would see if he could get maybe a traffic, kind of a station there where the kids went through, they could stop them, or then I went down to the police station last week to see if something else could be done, but nothing, as far as I know, has been done yet.
Okay, we'll get a report on that.
And I
then.
would just hope that the city of Monmouth would really take neighborhoods into consideration when they do this. If it's existing neighborhood, then it should stay a neighborhood.
Sure.
It should be respected as that, so children can go out in their front yards and not have to worry. I mean, I never saw those 2 boys all the time we lived there. They were in the backyard or in the car, and they'd take them to the park.
All right.
So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Marilee.
Thank you very much.
I'll have you give that to Phyllis. She'll share that with all of us as part of the public record. Thank you. All right. So that's all we have for public comments. We'll move on to our business agenda this evening. And we do have a couple of items on that. One of them is our public hearing on Legislative Amendment 1904, short-term vacation rentals. And we have information in our packet about that. And we have our Community Development Director, Suzanne Duffner, to remind us of what we are reviewing.
Great. Well, good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Here tonight to present the staff report for Legislative Amendment 19-04. This is regarding short-term rentals and the approved street tree list. So just by way of background information, This probably sounds a little familiar. We have had one set of public hearings already. If you recall, last April, that was named Legislative Amendment 19-01, but it's the same subject. And there were some concerns that were raised during the public input process about homestays or hosted rentals, as we're referring to them in the ordinance now. These are stays, short-term rental stays, where the owner or the resident of the dwelling is present, and they're basically renting out a room and staying there while the visitor is there. So it's a hosted stay. And the concern was that we should have less restrictive standards for those, since they're not really necessarily having a negative impact on the permanent housing stock, and there's an on-site presence from the dwelling owner, a resident, to kind of monitor the activity and make sure things wouldn't get out of hand, to preserve that neighborhood character. So the end of that hearing process, in the first reading of the ordinance, if you'll recall, the council referred that back to the Planning Commission to take a little bit of work on that, do some work on that issue. The Planning Commission since then has had 2 work sessions and a public hearing, and you've had the revised draft before you this evening that addresses those concerns. And I think they did a great job having a good, thorough discussion. We've researched some other communities and trying to strike that balance between allowing homeowners to use their property for short-term vacation rental, and then also trying to preserve the character of neighborhoods, and also preserving our permanent housing stock. So just to kind of explain a little bit that change to you, the revised ordinance would allow hosted short-term rentals, again, where the permanent resident is present on site. Those hosted short-term rentals would be allowed without a time limitation on the total number of nights per calendar year that the dwelling is used for a short-term rental. And the previous draft, if you'll recall, they were treated the same as non-hosted rentals, where the entire house is rented out. You can only do that for 30 days in a calendar year, or 30 nights in a calendar year. And then it needed to go through the conditional use process, whereby they applied, they had a public hearing, notice was given to the neighbors, and there was a fee involved with that. So that requirement for a conditional use permit for a hosted stay has gone away. So they basically have an unlimited number of nights they can do on those. Still need to get a permit for doing a vacation or a short-term rental, but it's not that more intensive, expensive conditional use permit process. Now, non-hosted rentals would still be required to go through that conditional use process if those were used for more than 45 nights per calendar year. So that number got bumped up a little bit too. If you'll recall, in the last draft, it was 30 nights. And so we gave a little bit more flexibility to the homeowner to bump that up to 45 nights. A lot of folks talked about summer months and snowbirds and Western Oregon University events that a lot of times bring people in that are looking for these types of housing or short-term accommodations. So those are 2 main changes. As I mentioned, I think a lot of good research and analysis has gone into developing this ordinance. We've been looking at this for over a year now. We've had a lot of good feedback from the folks on it, and looked at a lot of different examples in various communities. So I think while we may not have made everybody happy with this ordinance, I think we have a good start at least, and we will certainly, we talked a lot in the Planning Commission about monitoring this and seeing, how many vacation rentals we start to get permits for, and if there are problem areas that we need to go back, we can always amend the code. But this is trying to get a legal pathway for a use that we know is going on inside Monmouth. You can get on VRBO websites or Airbnb, and you'll see that people are actively doing these in Monmouth. So there are a couple of written comments that are attached to your report. So I just want to bring those forward so you could kind of hear some of the public comments and feedback that have come up since the April public hearings. There were 2 letters in opposition of passing a short-term rental ordinance. I felt that it will impact our housing stock negatively and drive housing prices up, were some of the concerns. and change the character of neighborhoods. And then there were also two letters or written comments in favor of allowing short-term rental stays. So we did have another public comment that wasn't in writing, but it was at the Planning Commission hearing. So on October 2nd, there was a public hearing on the revised ordinance with the Planning Commission, and we did hear from a local property owner resident who said that they are doing a vacation rental now, and they're in support of allowing these short-term rentals, and that they haven't had complaints from their neighbors. Have actually, in their example, the neighbors have been happy that they fixed up the house and that it hasn't created a noise or nuisances. So we did have that one public comment at the Planning Commission hearing. And then just this ordinance also would amend the list of approved street trees. It would remove ash trees as an allowable species, and this is based on recommendations that we've been hearing from OSU Extension Services and also urban foresters that are worried about the spread of emerald ash borer pest that's slowly making its way west. So take those out of there. And then just following along in the staff report, the council has three options. You can adopt the legislative amendment as recommended by the Planning Commission. You can adopt it and make some additional changes, or you can take no action on that. This does have to be adopted by an ordinance, so that would be kind of the next step, is to draft that ordinance and bring it back for first reading. And there's also a sample motion on page 2 of your staff report. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, so yes, Councilor Sharma.
First of all, I want to thank you and the Planning Commission for your willingness, and our vice chair is here tonight, for your willingness to give this another go. I know you've worked a long, long time on it, and you've worked very hard on it, so we all appreciate that. And I was a little bit confused about the non-hosted short-term rentals, but actually Michelle Chang, who wrote one of the letters, is my neighbor, and she says, it seems to me that what we're trying to avoid is people coming into Monmouth and buying a house just for the purpose of renting it out. And I remembered immediately that I stayed in a place like that in San Jose. Somebody had bought a house. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, divided the master bedroom in two, so they had 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, and they rented all 4 rooms out, and it was a horror. Nobody was there, and it was really awful. So I do appreciate that that you're going to limit that to 45 days. And also another question: is there somewhere in the code that that defines short-term rental, or is it all based on what a transient is and transient lodging? Because I don't know whether I'm just using an old computer at home, but I couldn't find it doing a search.
Yeah, so just, we do have a proposed definition on Exhibit 1, page 1 of a short-term rental. It means a dwelling unit or part of a dwelling unit that is rented, available for rent, or advertised or listed as available for rent as transient lodging, which within the meaning of Monmouth City Code, Chapter 5.50.010. So it refers back to our transient lodging
Yes.
tax chapter. So yeah, we do have a definition. Want to make sure that that's clear.
And a transient is someone who stays
30
in
days.
rented accommodation for 30 days. So how should the 45-day non-hosted short-term rental be referred to as something else then? I'm sorry, I'm gonna shut up now. I think.
No, that's okay. I think there's been some confusion on that, so I'm glad you brought that up. So one person can stay for a duration of 30 days and be counted as
I see.
short-term
Okay.
lodging. So you could have one person stay up to 30 days, they
Mm-hmm.
leave, and then you could have another person that comes in for 15 days in that calendar year and still not trigger the need for conditional use permit. So we haven't necessarily banned or prohibited whole house rentals over 45 days. They just have to go through additional review and permitting, and so that we'll be able to more actively monitor those and notify the neighbors and allow them an opportunity to come and comment and weigh in on those as well. So
Okay,
yeah.
thank
Good.
you.
Does that clarify?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, and thank
good.
you again for all your work
Yeah,
on this.
no, thank the Planning Commission. They were very patient and
Thank
did
you.
well.
Other questions? Nothing, Darren and Roxanne? Anything? Yeah, I again, appreciate the thoroughness. I think this has been a good process, and we've gotten information out folks and back from folks, and at this point then, we do have three
Oh,
options.
we need a public hearing,
Yeah,
testimony.
this is supposed to be an open up.
So I thought we weren't going to take public comment in this. I can remember. Okay, so I will open the public hearing, and we will take comments, and we will start with anyone speaking in favor of Legislative Amendment 1904, if anyone is prepared to do so. We didn't get any comment cards about that. So anyone in favor?
Will you take questions?
Sure, I guess. Yep, come on. And introduce yourself, Peyton.
My name is Peyton Llewellyn. I live at 262 Monmouth Avenue South. I've lived in Monmouth since 1970. My question is, how does the short-term rental situation, how does it connect, or does it connect with the topic of ADUs?
Yeah, great question. We had some discussion about that at the Planning Commission level. Some communities have chosen to prohibit the use of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, for short-term rentals because they want to preserve that housing stock as permanent rentals. So we reviewed that and discussed that quite in depth at the Planning Commission level. And while we are concerned about the permanent housing stock, I think we're at a stage where we don't know that is that big of an issue in Monmouth, that there's that much of a demand for short-term rentals as compared to a Lincoln City, for example, or the city of Bend, or someplace that's a key tourism destination. So, if something like that changes, then we can reevaluate that. But at least at this point, we didn't put that ban in our short-term rental ordinance, meaning somebody could choose to rent out their ADU as a short-term vacation rental.
Would the same restrictions apply?
Yes.
In other words,
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so there is a connection. There seems to be a lot of people I've talked to are confused over the two. And from what you're saying, the ADU could be used.
It could be used as a short term. Yeah, and I think the other point that was well taken or made is that if a homeowner or a property owner goes to the expense and time to create an accessory dwelling unit, there's probably more value in it renting it out as a permanent rental, where you have a contract and a permanent tenant versus, a few, 30 days, 45 days a year. So
I basically agree. I think also, though, that if you have a sports fan, for example, with a child or a friend or whatever on one of the college sports teams that would come in for a day or two at a time, that might be a use.
Yep, and that's what we're seeing from the people that have told us that they are doing these. Again, it's not that many, but the definition of a vacation rental is a little misleading. A lot of times it's extended family that they're looking for a place where they can all gather, in one home. So it's like a little reunion, or there's an event going on, or a graduation, and they're looking for something where they can all stay together. So, yeah. Good question.
Suzanne is exactly right. The, where you get, how you get there is in the definition of short-term rental means a dwelling unit. An ADU is a dwelling unit. So this definition encompasses ADUs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peyton. Councilor Lopez?
A point of
Let's
clarification
finish
on
the
that
public
point.
Yeah, let
testimony.
me finish
Let's
the
public
the
testimony
public, and then
first.
we get another chance.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go back a little bit. So anyone who would like to speak in favor of the legislative amendment 1904, short-term vacation rentals? Okay. Now, anyone who would like to speak against them in opposition to the changes that are proposed? And if you could state your name and
Yeah.
the city where you live.
Hi, my name's Garrett Knowles. I live in Monmouth at 636 Clay. I think I'm a little confused of what would be for and against, but to be against would be against just legislation trying to regulate this. Is that what the against would be? So, I suppose I would be against that. I came to the meeting 2 weeks ago that was a little bit of a different group of people in front of me, but basically explained what we set up this last May, and I'll kind of keep it a little briefer because I was too long with it. But basically, in May, we took my home back from some college students that we had rented it to, 5 college students, and we made it our primary residence and then opened up the opportunity to rent to anybody that wanted it for a weekend or a week or whatever they chose. And it was probably more popular than we were expecting it. We were thinking we'd do it here and there, but the gist of it is we made our house very nice. We cleaned up the outside and did a lot of things to improve, to make it a better sort of situation for renters. And to me, it seems like it's only been a positive thing for our residents and for us financially. And I think that people that come tend to be people that are doing well, that can afford to stay at someplace, and tend to be, it meets a need that people can't find. And so I also don't think there's that many around, and don't know if there's a huge need for regulation on these, but obviously that's for you guys to decide. But yeah, I don't know, it's been really positive. Should I go into more about what I said before, or just leave it at that?
You.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
tried to keep it to 3 minutes, so
Okay.
you got
Yeah, I
another
just,
minute.
essentially from the experience we've had, it's mostly been older families that come here to visit someone that lives in the area, whether it be Monmouth or Corvallis or Salem, and they leave the house nicer than it was, and the neighbors really have no idea. And I don't know, it's not like a party situation like I think some people would see it as, like, hey, let's go have a bachelor party and let's rent this house in Monmouth. That's not really why people come to Monmouth. We currently have a family that bought a home in Albany that the people they were doing it with kind of messed up the contract, and so they're using our house as a place for the 2 grandparents and then their family below them to live there. So there's, I think, 5 people living there, and otherwise they wouldn't have had anywhere to live for this month. So there are people that desperately need short-term places to live for weird reasons that you would never think of. And it's, you know, these guys, every time I talk to them, they tear up. They're so happy they have a home to live in with their family, rather than, I don't even know what they do. They're from California. So it meets some needs that I think you wouldn't think about until you do it. We certainly didn't. We were expecting graduation and maybe like a weekend for Oregon State football or Western football, but lots of people are in need of stuff like this. And yeah, I don't think it's created big problems. I think this started with the idea that this solar eclipse was going to be a big problem or whatever, and even that wasn't a huge problem. So I don't know that this is something that needs to be heavily regulated, but anyways, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Garrett.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else who would like to speak to this? Okay, so hearing none. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, so Councilor Lopez.
I have 2 clarifying questions. Would ADUs count as hosted or unhosted?
Unhosted, because it's the unit that has to be
Right.
occupied.
Yeah.
So anyone that was renting an ADU, if they were extending that past 45 days, there would be that approval process that would be gone
Correct.
through. So that would put some constraints over utilizing those for this instead of the permanent housing stock.
Right. Mhm.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
That was my understanding. I'm glad for the clarification. And then another question regarding the nature of this legislation. If under current Monmouth code, are ADUs allowed? Or not ADUs, my apologies, short-term vacation rentals allowed?
They are not. They're not listed as on our permitted use list or
So
additional.
by passing this, we would actually bring those current short-term rentals into compliance and allow them within the
Once
city.
they get a permit, which we've discussed, like a $25 permit for those that are less than 45 days or non-hosted, then yes, they would be brought into compliance. That was one of the purposes of this ordinance, was to create that legal pathway for this type of a use.
Just for, it's not actually even a permit, it's a registration is what it is.
Oh, okay, good,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Just
this
so we know-
does.
Just so the city knows where these are. Yeah.
So this does create a legal pathway, whereas right now there currently isn't, and anyone that is doing that currently is technically out of compliance, even if we're not
Enforcing it heavily.
enforcing it.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Counselor Schenkel up to speed.
Where we are.
Excuse me.
Sorry, Counselor Schinkel. Yes, we are in the public hearing phase. And so we'll take one more question. Go ahead, Peyton.
Peyton Llewellyn again. I'm a bit concerned of the comment that if the code is silent, then automatically somebody's out of compliance. If it's silent, is there something that, in the charter or something that says if the code's silent and somebody is doing something that's ostensibly legal by state standards or federal standards, why would it be out of compliance?
Take a crack at that and then can clarify. But so the way zoning ordinances in particular are crafted, each zone has a list of permitted and conditional uses. And if the use is not listed on there, it's not an allowed use. That's just the way zoning ordinances are constructed. It may be different for different ordinances, but at least for the purposes of zoning, it has to be on there as a permitted or conditional use to be allowed. So I don't know. So
Yeah,
there's
so
a way to
this ordinance-
clarify.
This ordinance is adding short-term rental to the list of permitted or conditional uses depending on the circumstances.
In a single-family
In the
residence
single-family
zone.
zone. Well, actually,
And then
low density.
other zones, right?
You've
Yeah.
got several zones.
Right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you could have industrial and residential, because industrial is not listed as a permitted use in the residential zone. So it's, I'm not sure what the legal terminology is for that, but you have to have it on that particular use.
But
Could I
list.
ask one more question on zoning?
Sure.
What is the status, a reader here, of zoning expansion whereby other buildings other than single-family dwellings would be allowed in an area traditionally single-family dwellings only?
Madam Mayor, maybe we could have Suzanne work offline. That's really not
Right, yeah,
within the
that
scope of this
doesn't
hearing. That's,
pertain to
you know,
this
General
issue, so-
question about zoning, yeah.
Have to get an answer to that, but yes, there have been changes in the state law to that, and I'm sure she can
Okay.
take those offline. All right. Counselor Schinkel, did you have any questions or comments about the ordinance as the legislative amendment is proposed? All right, then I will close the hearing. And now we have the opportunity to either bring this back for first reading as an ordinance as presented, make any changes we would like to see, or take no action.
Can I make a motion?
Please.
All right, I move to approve legislative amendment 19-04 and direct staff to prepare an ordinance to adopt the proposed amendments to the Monmouth City Code.
Second.
And a rush to second, Counselor Beltz and Counselor Lopez, take your pick,
It was a
Phyllis.
tie.
Whichever you
He's
had.
closer to Counselor Sharma.
Whichever you had. And I don't see any additional questions or comments. So all in favor of bringing this back as an ordinance, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Thank you. That passes unanimously, and so we will bring this back as presented. Again, thanks to our Planning Commission and Development Director for that. So, All right. Our next item of business for our regular session is to have the discussion we've been starting and kind of thinking through a little bit, and that is the process to recruit a city manager. Since Chad is graciously agreed to work with us, but he did kind of give us a timeline here.
Trying to
so-
get rid of me already.
Yes, exactly, right?
Opposite.
Week 2, it's like, how can we expedite this? So, no, he had another life planned before he gave up his retirement to work for us. So we have, he has prepared a staff report for us and sent some additional materials as part of the packet. So Chad, I'll have you talk through this a little bit with us, and then,
So the council's already had discussion about the filling of the position. Obviously, the city manager McClure has moved on to his other position starting in Canby on the 7th. I kind of will skip over previous actions and things like that and just move directly to the meat of things. There's 3 alternatives that the council can consider. One is an in-house process conducted by staff, which typically would be my position, and the city recorder, city attorney, to some extent would provide assistance. Contracting with the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments, which the executive director, O'Day, has already come to the council and talked about the type of services that they provide. And in the packet, there's a quote including the scope and fee for those services. And the third one is to hire a professional recruiting firm, an executive search firm that does this full time. So really the question to the council is, which one do you want to pursue? To that end, I contacted Sean O'Day and asked him to provide, mostly I was thinking of numbers, but he did provide a scope, which is included in your packet, and the fee of $10,256 plus expenses to do that. Also, to try to get a comparison the best you can under the circumstances, I contacted the City of Independence. They sent over their personal services agreement, the RFP that went out, and the proposal that was submitted by the executive search firm that they used, Waldron, and to provide a comparison. And I have a lot of notes that I can talk to the differences of those. I think the important thing between the two obviously is cost and scope. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Council of Governments, I've worked with Sean in the past. Sean does a great job. He did the selection, the search for the city of Carlton, so I was his primary staff assigned to assist with that. I know he recently did the city of Dallas, and I can just speak from experience. He does a great job. That said, the Council of Governments provides extensive services in a lot of different areas, including planning and this. They perform advocacy services and things like that. So when you think of the Council of Governments, they are kind of a high-end staff person that gets assigned over to do this. This is all that they would do as though they were doing it in-house. They don't have a super developed networking system. It's, when you compare it to the private firm, that's all they do, is that they have a lot of developed resources, networking. They use, it's a much more sophisticated and developed process that they use. They have internal systems and things like that, which explains the difference in the fee. So if you were just on the short, if you were looking at what the City of Independence did, the flat fee that they did, and I'm sure hopefully you've all had a chance to at least kind of just cruise through the scope that was provided by Waldron. Their flat fee was $26,000 plus expenses. By and large, I would say expenses between the two are going to be comparable. They would include advertising expenses, travel expenses, with the exception of travel for the recruiting firm, they bill for travel. The Council of Governments would not bill for their travel expenses. So you have advertising, you have all candidate expenses, travel, lodging, meals, you have all expenses related to the day of interviewing, and those type of things. But I think by and large, they're going to be pretty much the same. And the only unknown piece when I was looking at it had to do with the background checks. So if you were looking at Waldron's proposal, they included that as an expense that gets billed. It sounded like they hire a third party to do that. Whereas the Council of Governments would include up to 5 background checks, and then anything over that would be $400 per check. But that being said, when I checked with the City of Independence, what did they pay for expenses? The Waldron did the background checks at no cost. So that was included as part of their flat fee of $26,000. When I was doing the side-by-side look, I just left that as an unknown for the private firm and a known expense. So it's, if you use the $400 per check, it's worth the $2,000 of the $10,256 fee. So before I turn it over to you, when I'm looking at the differences between the two, obviously the private recruiting firm has this, they have more resources, it's done much more in depth. And what I wanted to do was draw attention to in Waldron's proposal, just assuming that they're all kind of the same if you have a private firm. The firm goes through a due diligence discovery phase, which is much more robust than what the Council of Governments would do. So the firm would come in and have a lot of one-on-one meetings. They would interview the council, they would interview department heads, and council, of course, can control the range of that. So I'm not saying this is in absolute terms, but they would interview council, mayor, council, department heads, staff, key stakeholders, public. They would have, could do surveys, they could do town hall meetings. Pretty much it was a open-ended type of approach to I just consider it due diligence, their discovery phase. And the intent of that is to ensure that they have all of the information that they need in order to, at the end game is to have the best match for a candidate as possible. So looking at organizational needs, culture, and different things like that. So it's a very robust phase. If you compare that over to the Council of Governments, Sean would come in and meet with the council and the key staff person and do this basically in one meeting, using prior profile or maybe another community's profile as the starting point, and then sit down and have that type of discussion with the council to have the same information to develop the profile for the position. But, you know, you can just look at the scope, certainly not nearly as robust as what the private recruiting firm would do. And then the second piece is the outreach. So when they're engaging potential candidates, also another robust piece as compared to what the Council of Governments would do. So Council of Governments typically would go through their advertising phase, place it where, you know, the in-state, West Coast region, ICMA, you know, things like that. But with some pretty few exceptions, they would leave it at that, I think. If Sean or myself, for example, if we knew that there was some recent folks that became eligible, there would be a deliberate contact made, that was made. As compared to a recruiting firm who would send out targeted profiles to select people. They wouldn't send it to all X number of city managers, administrators in the state. They would go through whatever screening based upon the profile, and they would target telephone calls, solicitations. They have a database of people that they know that are interested, different things like that. So again, the outreach piece of potential candidates is more robust than what you would typically see with the Council of Governments. And the other couple things that I know would just jump out at you if you were reading through the Waldron proposal, they do provide a guarantee to the end of having an engaged person. So if you went through your first recruitment, you didn't find anybody you wanted, they have a guarantee that they would reopen the process and do that at no additional charge. They also have, with under certain circumstances, they would, if the city manager left for cause, I think, or if, there's exceptions that wouldn't apply to that,
Right.
but at a 1/3 fee of their original fee, they would come back and redo the recruitment process. So there's advantages like that. You can negotiate, say, an extended recruitment with council governments. That a lot of these things aren't necessarily off the table. It's just not something that they would normally do. But if you wanted to seek a guarantee to make sure that you engage someone at the end of the day, I'm sure that's a negotiable item with the Council of Governments. So I'll just kind of stop there and answer questions.
Okay, thanks. And I would like to point out, obviously, we would go through an RFP process.
Yeah,
Our
with the Council of
purchasing
Governments, you can do
rules.
that directly with a intergovernmental agreement, since it's a governmental agency. If you elect to go with a recruiting firm, then we would put out an RFP and solicit proposals, and then go through a regular public contracting process to retain the candidate firm.
Yeah, so there is a process, and we're not saying by putting Waldron in as the comparator that that's who
Right.
we would end up with or who we would even recommend. But similar size city, very, very recent. We thought it was probably pretty helpful for people to see the details of what that kind of recruitment would look like as compared to something like the Council of Governments. And I had a couple questions about this. I write RFPs, I do public contracting in my real life, and one of the things that I looked in at this proposal that was a little alarming was potentially, in Independence's case, like an 8.5-month process from the day the RFP is advertised until the day the city manager would started in Independence. I'm being respectful of Mr. Olson's time and saying that's a long time. So I reviewed this timeline, and I feel like they were very generous and extensive, and I kind of ran it by Lane just to make sure there weren't deadlines I wasn't familiar with, and this process can be shortened.
Waldron will probably tell you that, I've worked with them before, they'll tell you that the quality of candidates they get is reflective of the time that it's open, and they'll want time, but you can negotiate the specific elements of that, and they'll tell you the pluses and minuses of shortening this particular phase or this particular phase. But yeah, there's nothing statutory here in terms of the length of time that's identified in the proposal.
I'd say the two time periods that are you're gonna have to consider. One is if you do a solicitation between preparing it, putting it out, leaving it open for a period of time, bringing it back, doing the review, the evaluation, submitting it to the council, and inking paper, you're talking about a couple months.
Yeah, that seemed long to me. I don't usually, the timeline they had here that's over 7 weeks for that part of it seemed long to me.
Yeah.
I usually compress that a
But,
little.
there's just, it's,
Right.
there's
Yeah.
logistics involved. The second one is just, and what the city attorney was just talking about, how long do you want to leave the
Right.
opening? So that can really drive things. Is it 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks? And everything else you can really kind of move quicker, but you'll have a couple blocks that when you're looking at your timeline, that will kind of dictate how quickly you get to the end.
And the other piece you don't control under either of these scenarios is how much time your chosen candidate needs to extricate himself or herself from their current situation. So
Right.
they may need to give a certain amount of notice that you just have to live with. And that you can't negotiate, you may not be able to negotiate away.
Right. So other questions about either of these? Counselor Schinkel.
Chad, when you were assisting Sean in the process in Yamhill, how many, if you can ballpark it, how many staff hours would you say went into the assisting of this process?
It would be pretty tough. It was not, it wasn't onerous. It didn't take away from other time. Became just a project that, by and large, it was myself and the city recorder to help. So handling the logistics of placing the advertisements and things, but, it's 40 hours. I mean, it was over the entire 4 or 5 months that we were working on it.
So I guess the question I had was, in addition to this 10,000 and change or 12,000 or whatever it is, how much additional money did we put into it that's not in that number? And then comparing it to, so we're comparing apples to apples, then comparing it to the recruiting firm.
The expenses?
Yeah, well, not the expenses, but
time.
the actual time that we spent on our own salaries, not just
much
the
work
fee
does
that
city
we
staff
paid
do?
to
Right.
COG.
Great question.
It's a tough question to answer. There would be obviously more hours on the Council of Governments side than on the other side. Council of Government would not do the logistics and scheduling and all of that as compared to the other. It's pointed out that they handle all of the logistics. There's still going to be some staff support to help make that happen, but certainly a lot less. But I couldn't pin that down.
Of a comment. Everyone I've talked to in the community and everyone I've talked to in general has said, this will be the most important decision you will ever make on city council and for this community. And so it feels as if that to me lends itself to getting a guarantee and getting the best possible bang for our buck. And I know Sean O'Day did come and speak with us, and I'm a big fan of the COG, in fact. However, I'm also a big fan of having the broadest search possible, and I realize that costs more money. But again, this is an incredibly important decision for the future of this community. So to spend a little bit more money and put a little bit more time and investment, at least to me, it seems like it's well worth doing that. So there's my 2 cents.
Does anyone have other questions about, Chris, I know you had asked some questions, and are you prepared to share those with us?
Yes, I had emailed a couple questions, and mine were my first question was along the same lines as Councillor Schinkel's question, but as far as it relates to costs and any ancillary costs aside from the base fee that we would be charged by whichever organization we chose, if we chose one of those. And so Chad Manager Olson, I will give you an opportunity to elaborate on the costs. I do feel like you did a fairly good job at answering that in your initial introduction to the process. But apples to apples, as close as we can, as far as our dollars and cents, in addition to that base fee, because there has been a lot of speculation historically about what that would look like.
So the comparison of costs are, I think you can, so again, I have the email here to make sure I could remember exactly what I said. When you're trying to do it on this type of thing, the quantifying the scope of work that's being done, to do a side-by-side is a little bit more difficult. And the reason I say that is I sat down to start doing that, and I quickly got to the point that I said, Council of Governments is providing the same services that the private contractor is providing. So, with some exceptions, of course. But you're trying to assign or quantify the additional services being provided to a dollar amount. And I'm not, in all honesty, especially on kind of short time period that I'm working, I don't think I could do that. I think we can talk about the differences in services that you're going to receive and the advantages, quite honestly. For example, the contractor would do, or at least under the Independence RFP that they did a compensation assessment. The Council of Governments would not do that. In fact, Sean says straight up, go take a look at the Local Government Personnel Institute to do that. So I found it really kind of difficult. I did look, and like I said early on, looking at the profile development, that's where you see just a real magnitude of difference between their approaches and how they put that profile together. A lot more time, which translates, that's why you see a higher fee. But they didn't include an hour per task, So if I had a engineer scope that they attached the task and the hours and the fees, I could answer that question. It's not to say you couldn't get it. We would have to get it from a contractor to tell us that. I can't answer that. And the targeted candidate outreach piece, I highlighted that as really something. There's a lot more hours that go into that, but quantifying the hours to answer that question specifically, I could do a better job if I had another couple weeks to do that. But
And I wouldn't ask you to.
everybody, I can hear the
Yeah.
groaning, at that.
No.
It's tough. So what I did when I first started this side by side and trying to do that, because that's my natural first step forward, is I then stood back and said, the analysis that you want to do in this case, at least at this point, is look at the difference in services being provided. That's the answer to those questions. It's not, the fee is the fee. But you can quickly, I saw the difference. And being a fan of the Council of Governments, having worked with the executive director to do this, to be honest, that would be my first, that's my go-to type of thing. After you look at the proposal, the RFP that Independence put out, and you saw what the contractor put up there, you could just see the magnitude of the difference in the level of services that are being provided. That's where I wound up. And the question should be, to me anyway, at this point, is looking at the scope of work that they do in order to ensure that you get the person that you want to get. And it's much, much more elaborate. And again, it's a big number to me, but it was obvious that it's probably worth every penny.
If you're talking about costs on top of the fee, they're gonna be roughly.
They're gonna be
They're going to be roughly similar.
Oh, yeah, the expenses, out-of-pocket expenses for travel, lodging,
Yep.
all of that. It's going to be comparable with the one unknown of background checks, because that's factored into the Council of Governments. And I couldn't quite discern that over on the private side. But I agree with the city attorney. That's a comparable. Whatever it's going to be the same on both sides.
And then the one other unknown, if I can refer back to your email, would then also be the travel for the private firm in conjunction with some of these, but that will be
We
small.
hire someone from Portland to come to meetings, they're gonna charge more than someone coming from Salem, but
Yep.
the COG doesn't even
Charge.
Yes.
include
Right.
any
Well,
charges.
so I did talk to both the finance director and the human resources director over at Independence. The travel expenses for the consultant was about $750.
Okay.
They had about $3,200. I asked their finance director, I saw her at a meeting, and I asked her, can you go back and check this? Because they had rolled in some candidate expenses into that as well. But the consultant's expenses were about $750. which was, I thought was not unreasonable, certainly.
To move away from the matter of expenses, I'd like to touch on something you mentioned a moment ago. The scope of work. It was my impression that you were quite impressed once you really dug into it by the scope of work that that Waldron provides, and I know that this may be a difficult question because it asks for perhaps your professional opinion, but do you find that within a quote like that, that is a good value?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, short answer. Yeah.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yes, and Councilor.
I read once in a journal that the average amount of time that a city manager spends in one particular city is between 5 and 7 years. Is that about right? Okay. And I think it's important for us to understand that if we hire a city manager and that person sort of going in a different direction than what the council wants to go, we can always terminate them.
Yeah.
We're not stuck with them. And then also, if we get a really, really excellent city manager, how long is it going to take before that city manager gets one of those headhunter letters saying, would you like to go work for a bigger city?
From past experience, I'd say about 12 years.
12 years before that.
With Scott, because of Scott.
Oh, with Scott, yeah,
From
Scott
our
was here
current
for, yeah,
experience.
but 5 to
5
7
to
is
7,
about,
yeah,
right,
that's
okay.
your average shelf life.
Yeah.
Okay.
We always quoted about
Shelf
5
life.
years, and like, for example, my range was 11 at the longest and 2 at the shortest.
Okay. Okay, so I think those are important things to keep in mind as well. Just because we have a wonderful city manager doesn't mean that we'll have them forever.
Yeah.
Okay.
But having not gone through this process at all for 12 years, it's good that we're spending a little extra time thinking this through, so. And did you have any questions?
I don't. I thought, I appreciate you putting all this together because it really did give us a good feel for all three types, which I think the first type we don't want to probably go down, but the second and third are really the two choices, and you did a good job of getting this info that helps us make a better decision, hopefully. Because I was leaning one way before I read the packet, and when I read the packet, I changed my direction a bit, so.
Yeah.
One more question, and it may be something that Councilor Lopez was trying to get to, but let me see if I can ask again. The two options, working with the COG or working with a consultant of some time, how much city staff time would be necessary? And would it be the same amount of city staff time if we did both?
No, it would be more with the Council of Governments and less with the consultant. That's part of the increased fee, is that they take on a lot of those responsibilities.
So in terms of cost, I mean, there would be more cost to the working with the COG, just in terms of city staff time. They would then be doing this instead of doing something else. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Byron's questions. Okay, and again, looking through this, kind of going through what a process would be, again, we talk about a longer process, that getting a contract in place could take us a few weeks longer. And there are ways to shorten that up. One would be potentially to say, this RFP that Independence put out kind of meets our needs, and we could instruct Chad to work with Lane, make sure we could get an RFP, or Janet, whoever puts these out for the city, and kind of expedite the process a little bit so we could move forward. But if we choose the Council of Governments and we accept the scope as presented, then they sign an agreement tomorrow and get going. So that's a consideration for us, I suppose. The other thing I did want to bring up, Councilor Carey couldn't be here tonight because he's off on vacation. And he did send out comments. I don't know if y'all had a chance to read them, but, he did kind of, he was weighing both and felt like he really wanted to hear this conversation as well. I have had the opportunity, both knowing we were going to be at this point, when I was at the Oregon Mayors Association and then again at League of Oregon Cities a couple of weeks ago, have had an opportunity to talk to other communities that have been through this. And you get both folks who've used either our council of governments or sort of a local similar council, and folks who've used a private firm. And I think really what you get is that they say the thing about using a private firm is you spend a lot more time really working through what you want and what is important to you. It's a lot easier to get some of that outreach done, as we say, the private interviews and things, getting a little bit broader scope. But it's really about learning more about ourselves and then having them do the work about learning about the candidates. When we say expenses for the candidate travel would be about the same, except if Waldron's or a firm like this is working more with regional and connecting more with folks from out of state, those travel costs are going to be higher. Independence had 2 finalists from in-state, in the valley basically, and 2 finalists from out of state. So they had to pay more to bring candidates in and things like that. So those things, however, great opportunities to meet people with very different ideas. And I know there are probably candidates who are well aware of us because of both Dallas and Independence just going through this process. That folks know that we will be looking, and perhaps that will make a pool in either decision we make. Well, we would potentially have a good pool of folks who know a little bit more about us than they might have otherwise had this area been quieter recently. What I'm hoping we can do tonight is make this decision, and so we can get moving one way or the other. Again, if we decide to go with the Council of Governments, looking at that scope of work, we would accept any comments or considerations of things we might want to negotiate in it at this point, but otherwise it would be a matter of drafting the IGA, Intergovernmental Agreement. And if we choose to go forth with submitting an RFP or preparing one and getting it out, directing staff to kind of get this going. Lane, would we need to, if we just said we trust you to prepare an RFP, would we need to approve that?
No. I would think you'd want to see it.
Yes.
Yeah, but you don't have to approve it in advance.
Right.
Chad has contract authority to issue the RFP, and if you said that you want one that looks like Independence, well, that would be pretty clear direction. And I don't know about Chad, but this is not an area where creativity counts for a lot. And got an RFP that worked recently in a very similarly situated community and situation. You could probably depend pretty heavily on that RFP as being largely adequate for what you're looking for. How about I'll invite Chad's input on that?
No, I agree with that completely. It's, the RFP, Independence was thorough. As far as what I would typically do for something like this in the past would be to prepare it, continue on moving forward, but the council would have a chance, I would distribute it to the council. You would have it, and you always have approval once we solicit. The only thing I would, there's an evaluation process that would go into it, the scoring and things like that. So, some councils would want to stay away from that because they would just want to delegate that off to staff, or you might have a few department heads, myself, city attorney, and 1 or 2 council members to act as kind of just representatives, because it's wide open. But I would send it out and to the council. You would have it, and then next time you would see it probably at a work session if the timing was right. In order to accelerate it, you might skip through a work session, just do it directly during a council meeting like tonight.
Okay.
If I can recommend, your typical contract process is it to do the evaluation administratively. I'd recommend staying with that.
Right.
We typically don't get council involved in contract reviews and awards of contracts like that.
Right, and then when a contract's negotiated, do we have to approve the actual contract?
You don't have to.
We don't have to.
But in this case, I think you would want to, since this is.
The firm working
directly
for
with
us,
you. That's right, yeah.
I have to look at your contracting policies. So usually, there's whatever the limits are in kind of
Yeah.
past practice.
Yeah, this would be a contract.
Right. Well, it's not like we always want to meet the public works contractors or anything, but yeah, we might want to do something on this. All right, additional questions or comments? Counselor Lopez.
Are you entertaining motions at this time?
Well, gosh, I am.
I move that the City Council approve Alternative 3, hire a professional recruiting firm to recruit Monmouth's new city manager and direct staff return with a proposed scope and fee to that effect.
A second.
Let's see. Okay, if I can understand what okay, so that would be after the RFP, is that it?
So that, yeah.
So,
Fee-
I'm sorry, I was basing my motion
Yeah,
off
no,
of
no, no,
what
no,
was
and I just saw
proposed in
that.
the staff
So-
report.
Yeah, I apologize. I understand what the motion is intended to be. which is-
Motion to
Put out
direct
an
staff
RFP.
to generate an RFP to attempt to hire a professional recruiting firm.
Yeah.
Option number 3.
Second.
All right, moved by Counselor Lopez, and second we'll give to Counselor Schinkel. And any questions or comments about that?
I have a little bit of commentary, and it's in reflection of Counselor Carey's email to us here tonight. I, much as Counselor Carey attested in his email, came into this very much on the fence, and over the past couple weeks have been leaning one side and the other. It is clearly a large decision, and this is the first step toward progressing toward a new permanent city manager. That being said, items that were presented tonight are City Manager Pro Tem's testimony regarding his analysis of the two different recruiting options with bringing an outside firm in, as well as something Counselor Carey stated in here, which is the reality is that this individual, we will likely, over their term here, if they do complete that around 7 years or 5 to 7 years, pay them in the ballpark of $1 million to be here and serve the city. It makes these, small monetary amounts at this point seem fairly inconsequential to making sure that we cast the most extensive search possible. And while that search may result in us finding someone locally right here, or it may result in us finding someone from afar, the peace of mind that we know, that I know that we did everything that we could to ensure we got the best fit possible is what led me down this road. So thank you all, and thank you for entertaining my lengthy comment.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other need for comment, I will ask all in favor of the motion as presented, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed?
No.
So that is 1 no, and Counselor Carey's comments entered, but no vote by proxy, obviously, so.
Madam Mayor, could we make sure to have his comments made a part of the record of the
Yeah.
meeting? Okay.
Yeah, I think Phyllis has a copy
Okay.
of the
Yeah, I
email.
Sent them to us.
Yeah, she included them to
Okay,
us.
all right, but I just, yeah, okay,
Right.
I want to make sure they're part of the
Yes.
public record.
They are.
Okay.
Yep. That was not private to me. That was sent through her. All right, so you feel directed?
Have direction.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will now entertain any other general council comments before we adjourn back to our work session where we do have a
We need to
few
do the
items.
urban renewal district. don't
Oh,
we?
right,
Up
yes,
here?
before we do our urban renewal district, before we go back, thank you.
You act like somebody who has another job.
It's been a week. It's been a week and it's only Tuesday. Thank you. So any other comments? If not, then we will adjourn our regular session and we will turn around and put on our urban renewal agency hats.
You know, One of these days, I'm gonna come in here with a hat.
Hat? Would you wear a hat? That would be lovely.
Hat.
Yeah. So I would like to convene the Tuesday, August 15th meeting of the Urban Renewal Agency and ask for a roll call, please. Ms. Bowman?
Mr. Lopez.
Here.
Dr. Sharmer.
Here?
Mr. Schinkel.
Here.
Mr. Silbernagel.
Here?
Ms. Beltz.
Here.
Ms. Coons.
Here. And our item of business this evening, we do have an opportunity for citizen comments on the Urban Renewal Agency. If anyone would like to speak under the same conditions about our Urban Renewal Agency. Peyton.
My name is Peyton Llewellyn. I live at 262 Monmouth Avenue South. I guess I have some questions rather than total comments. The totality of the amount mentioned in the, first of all, I'm confused about the Urban Renewal Agency as such and the developmental committee for the city. I'm confused about that, but I am concerned about the $300,000 subsidy given to developers in the sense, for the reason behind it, that they might not be viable businesses, or businesses would be in trouble because of high rents or something. My comment is that I'm against that sort of thing because it seems to me, let the marketplace decide. That's what competition's about. And if somebody can't make it, then that's a problem for them. But to have the city or a city agency subsidize at the beginning just because construction costs have gone up, the construction costs have gone up for everyone. And I'm opposed to that sort of thing. I don't know where the money came from. It seems that the Urban Renewal Agency the money just came out of thin air, and it seems to me, from what I've been told, that the agency is on a payment plan because of loans that they have taken out in the past. So, and I wasn't able to find where the paper trail for the money, where it comes from, where it goes, and why. The only thing I read in the newspaper was that the developer came, asked for money because they said that they faced some increased construction costs, and they were granted up to $300,000. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you. And I think it might be good, we had a presentation not long ago from Scott McClure to remind us a little bit about the history of our Urban Renewal Agency. And we all had an opportunity to review that. That was a work session. We did not have that at a regular session. And I think it's good. People don't understand what an urban renewal agency is necessarily and where that money comes from. And I have a simple explanation, but I'm wondering if one of my expert staff over here can maybe give a little bit better explanation of how that works.
Well, again, I think it's maybe a comment better taken offline because it is awfully expensive. Complicated to describe urban renewal financing, but basically the district gets revenue off of the growth in the property, the growth in the increase in property taxes driven off of the appreciation and value of property within the urban renewal district from the date of its formation. And it's very common for urban renewal districts to leverage that, use that for financing, borrow the money, and then pay that back over time and use the money for projects within the urban renewal district that foster business and economic development. That's about the best I can do in 30 seconds.
And I think that's a great explanation. I
will say that the budget document for the URA is online and does have some very pithy, I hope, explanations of where the money comes from and what we're doing with the money.
I think when I described it to people, having been on the Urban Renewal Agency Review Board prior to joining City Council, that it is actually a designation intended for this. It is intended to do things like the facade grant that we do, which helps downtown businesses improve their property values and encourage more development. And because that property, the S-Curves property, was designated as part of the Urban Renewal Agency when it was created, there was money intended for this. And there's a trade-off, and the trade-off I say is that money that is being it's not additional property taxes anyone's paying. I think that's really important to folks to know, that they're not paying extra for that, but that it's taking some of the value in those property tax improvements, as Lane said, and it's putting them aside into a fund which we spend on economic development. The trade-off is that those property taxes aren't going to fund other city services. But as we talked about when we made the decision in our public meeting, there's a return on that investment we felt was important, right? That eventually those monies will be going into the general fund after a period of time, and that those improvements were worth the investment that we chose to make in them. Some urban renewal agencies do borrow money and use their property tax increment to pay that back, but not all. Some of them just have been collecting the money for years, set aside, and then use that for these kinds of purposes. So I think Independence has one. I know Salem has several urban renewal districts.
Dallas has one.
Dallas has one. It's a very common way for cities to finance that kind of thing, to spur greater growth and eventually increase the overall tax base. Is that fair? So that's a
Just add
Yes.
one thing, we're all gonna be getting our property tax bills in a few weeks, and if you look at it, you'll see there's a line item that says Monmouth Urban Renewal Agency. For me, it's about $110 that I pay, that I'll be paying this next year for the urban renewal.
But it's not,
I'm-
it's not additional tax.
It's, everything is delineated there on the tax bill, and you can see it. Oh, you don't have one on yours?
No, I'm just saying, but it's
Delineated
you would
along
still be
with-
paying those dollars, but instead of allocating to the urban renewal, it'd be paying to the school district.
Yes, school
to the
district, fire
cemetery
district.
Oh, yeah, all of your
Yes,
taxing districts,
yes,
yeah.
County,
so-
city.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so there it is, so,
Right.
and I think the overall ultimate goal for the urban renewal districts is to prevent urban blight that we've seen in so many cities, with the flight to the suburbs and weeds growing up in the cracks of the sidewalks and broken windows downtown, that sort of thing. So it's something that I think we should all welcome.
Yeah, it's been used for a couple of decades around for cities. So thank you for that comment and that opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about what this is. And we did conduct business on the night of something, October 1st. And so those minutes are included here. And as a consent calendar item, I would welcome a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
And moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the Urban Renewal Agency meeting of October 1st, 2019. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Thank you. So we do have a bit of business to conduct, and our finance director, Janet Schnard, has to talk to us about a little bit of a formality in the Oregon public budgeting law to be able to transfer money to use. So, Janet?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and councilors. So essentially, there's always a chicken and egg with these types of activities. This activity or this opportunity to invest in this economic incentive came up fairly quickly, and so it seemed presumptuous to seek approval of authorized appropriations before you had approved the economic incentive. Once that economic incentive was approved, in consulting with the auditors and also with local budget law, we do need to pay for that incentive instead of out of capital outlay where those appropriations would have been most easily found. We need to move some appropriations to materials and services because an economic incentive doesn't result in an asset to the city, essentially, is the short answer. Now, the capital outlay funds or appropriations that were there some of them were earmarked for the ODOT highway median, as well as some ongoing discussions that we're having with regard to the Warren sidewalk contract. And so not all of that $300,000 is available. Approximately $20,000 of it at this point we anticipate spending over the next month or two. We may need to go to contingency appropriations. In fact, I expect that we will to finish up the ODOT highway median. It's kind of, again, chicken and egg. Do I do contingency appropriations now without knowing what the full scope of the spending will be for capital outlay? I'm going to wait on that until I have a better idea of what that is and probably bring that back to you, I'm thinking in late November or early December, because by then we'll have made progress on the ODOT highway median and know what the bills are going to come in at. So all of that to say, like I said, there's about $20,000 that I need to leave in capital outlay. Fortunately, we have some facade grants appropriations already that have not yet been spoken for in materials and services. This does mean that we won't be able to do any until and unless we go to contingency appropriations as well. But all that to say, this is why I've put $280,000 as your number instead of $300,000, if that's confusing. I'm going to be taking $280,000, I hope, with your approval, from capital outlay, putting it in with materials and services, and leaving some in each bucket to spend on the other things that we do need to spend them on. And so with that, I'm looking for your approval to do that appropriation, because otherwise I'm not in a good place, because I do need to spend the money from that line item.
And again, we budgeted to spend the money, we just have to change the categories according to the budget law. And if we hadn't appropriated any in that, we'd be having to go through a very different process.
What's the resolution number?
There is a resolution, and this would be resolution number 33. The Urban Renewal Agency doesn't do many of these things. So resolution number 33 would direct this transfer, and this will be a roll call if we move to do so.
Move adoption of Resolution 33, a resolution approving an appropriation transfer of $280,000 for FY 1920 and directing the finance director to make appropriate entries to record the appropriation transfer in the FY 1920 URD budget, documents, and financial system.
Thank you, Mr. Schinkel. A second.
I'll second that.
Second from Dr. Sharmer. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor. Now we'll do the roll call, Phyllis, please.
Mr. Schinkel.
Yes.
Ms. Beltz.
Yes.
Ms. Kuntz.
Yes.
Mr. Silvernagle.
Aye.
Mr. Lopez.
Aye.
Dr. Sharmer.
Yes.
All right, so resolution number 33 passes. Please make those entries, and we're all square with that. And with no other business before the agency, I will adjourn that meeting. And now we'll take an 8-minute break before we resume in the back.